For cheap D2R items, visit aoeah.com. You get 3% off with the code ARIAT. Check the link in the description. Hello and welcome everybody. In this guide I will show you how to make a barbarian ready for PvP. He's a strong fighter who is a lot of fun to play and also not that complicated because you don't use too many different skills. Mastering the Barb still requires a lot of practice, of course. The basic equipment is not even that expensive. What ends up being pricey is an almost perfect inventory or nice rolled rare axes or helmets, like I've already shown in various videos about expensive items. My Barb here is a BvA, which means Barb versus all. I can adapt him to all kinds of enemies and also for team duels. But as always, let's start with the stat points and skills. You can stick to the following pattern. Enough strength for the equipment, dexterity up to 75% block chance using a storm shield, and all remaining points into vitality. Barbs who only duel against other barbs, also called BvB barbs, maybe distribute the points slightly different. With burn equipment, vitality and strength get points until damage and life points are in the desired ratio. In the past, it was popular to have a little more damage than life in the end. Now the skill tree. In any case, we maximize Whirlwind in the combat skill tree, Axe in the masteries, and for war cries we maximize Shout and battle orders, for much life and defense. The remaining skill points can be distributed differently. You should also unlock battle command with 1 point, unless you play a CTA in the weapon switch, then you get the skill as well. It also makes sense to put more points into the passive skills. A BvA unlocks them at least with 1 point each. More points in speed or natural resistance are especially popular for BvC barbarians. That stands for Barb versus Caster. A BvB barbarian on the other hand would definitely pull up and maximize Iron Skin. In the combat skills there is also the jump, which you can use to stun opponents for a short time. It can also be very useful in team versus team. A pure BvB Barb doesn't need that, of course, so he won't waste any points there. A BvC on the other hand puts as much as possible in there to increase the range of the stun. Defense is not really necessary for a pure BvC. Now let's have a look at the breakpoints we need. We won't have to worry about attack speed. The maximum IAS breakpoint we need for Berserker axes is 34, the axes we will use are already fast enough. Faster hit recovery should be at least 27%, better 48%. Reaching the breakpoint at 86 is usually unnecessary, maybe you do it sometimes against some nasty assassins. Our cast rate generally should be at least at 20%, except for BvB, there we won't need it. But against some other opponents, especially casters, you should urgently put on more FCR, so that you can teleport faster. 37 or even 63 are the values to break here. Now let's look at the equipment. Weapons first. Everywhere we don't need block chance, so against most casters or even smiters, we will carry 2 Berserker axes, Grief and Beast. Grief brings very high damage and deadly strike, Beast gives us the Fanatism aura, so even more damage and attack rating. Wherever we need block chance, for example against Amazons or other barbarians, we use Grief and Storm Shield. Some BvB players swear by Breath of the Dying. This weapon has some high damage and also gives plus 30 on all attributes. The ultimate of course would be some ethereal rare Berserker axe with much increased damage, Fool's mod for AR and damage on character level, self-repair and attack speed. Then we put on an upgraded Ariats with some nice jewel in it. Here you want to have % damage and in addition strength or dexterity, gladly also attack rating or faster hit recovery. I had a yellow jewel that rolled quite well. Alternatively, a barbarian can also go for a COA if he needs reduced damage or has to improve his resists. In the high end there are also rares that can be extremely powerful. A 220 circ with Visio mod and 2 sockets for example would be extremely badass. The body armor will be Enigma in most cases, so we can teleport. Against Smiters or other barbarians you can also maybe wear a 40 to get out even more damage. We should have several amulets in our sideboard. In most cases we will take High Lords because of Deadly Strike. Maras can also be useful if you need resistances. A faster cast amulet with +2 to Barb skills is sometimes useful to reach a breakpoint. You also should have the Angelic set combo, which you will wear against enemies with high defense value. Most times you will use 2 Angelic rings to get the attack value bonus twice. Otherwise we carry a Ravenfrost and a ring with attack rating, and in addition things like faster cast, stats and resists. Sometimes 2 Ravenfrost are also useful if allowed. Of course it is also good to have Dwarf Star and Wisp Projector ready when playing against the corresponding elements. The shoes are Gore Riders, finally a case where we don't need alternatives. For belt we usually wear either Verdungos because of vitality and reduced damage, or Arachnid Mesh for the cast rate. If playing against lightning, just pick a Thunder Gods. The gloves can be Steelrend for more damage, Draculs because of open wounds, or Tranguls for better cast rate. Against Smiters, Clay gloves can sometimes be helpful because they slow. In the weapon switch we play 2 weapons to cast the shouts. A Heart of the Oaks and a CTA are the best choice. Besides Torch Nanny, we need maximum damage, attack rating and life in the inventory, preferably all together on one charm. In many cases it's also good to have a few charms with running speed instead of life. Against elemental enemies you should also have some charms with resistances. Here you can see some typical setups for my barbarian. Barb vs Barb, I play Grief, Storm Shield, Ariats, 40, Verdungos and Angelic Set. Barb vs Smiter, I switch to Grief plus Beast and COA with 2 Bear Runes. Barb vs Caster, I keep the 2 axes but switch to Enigma. For cast rate I add Arachnid Mesh, Trangul's Gloves, the FCR Amulet and an FCR Ring, so I get to 65%. The other ring is a Dwarf Star, Ravenfrost or Wisp, depending on what I need. Barb vs Amazon, I pick Grief and Storm Shield, Enigma, Ariats, High Lords, Steelrend, Arachnid Mesh, an FCR Ring and a Ravenfrost. A few words about the gameplay as well. Basically it is quite similar against all characters, after all you only attack with Whirlwind. However, in detail, the way you use it against different opponents can be various, and there are different whirling techniques you should know about. Long whirls are used to gain distance, for example when you have to get out of a stun lock, which often happens against assassins. Short whirls on the other hand are used for attacking, so you are not trapped in the movement for long, but still get the 2 free hit checks from Whirlwind. Afterwards you can directly go for the next attack or flee if necessary. If you attack with teleport, you generally want to port directly onto your enemy if possible and then use the short whirlwinds. The best way to do this is to whirl around the opponent in a triangle. This is called the Dance of Death or triple whirl. To do this, it's best to hold down the mouse button the whole time instead of making a single click for each whirl. In the past, you could completely lock your opponents in their hit recovery animation. A very special technique is called clipping. Here you want to use your advantage in range, e.g. against a smiter. You don't want to whirl right through him so that he can hit you too. You go slightly past him so that his shield misses, but the axes hit thanks to their range. So it's best to set the long whirl in just such an angle that we tangent the edge of his aura. Here we don't want to do a short whirl because then we'll stop and the paladin will be on us in no time. You can also use feints. You start the whirl in one direction just to change direction spontaneously because you haven't clicked that far. So you apply a rather short whirl to feint and make the opponent react, and only the second is the actual attack. You can use feints in teleport attacks as well as in clipping, which is called counter clipping then. For enemies that flee and dash across the map quickly, it helps to use teleport whirlwind attacks where you don't aim at the enemy itself, but try to guess its path. So that's some kind of classic pre-aiming. Otherwise, you can also use jumps to stun the enemy by his hit recovery animation. With the right timing, you can interrupt the teleport or stop the opponent from attacking. That was my BvA guide with different setups and tactics. More duel examples can be found on my channel again and again. Practice makes perfect. I say goodbye, take care, and may the loot be with you.
Come on. Follow me.